because he can't be Shomer Shabbat and president at the same time. We have Geert Wilders, who's so pro-Israel, he reckons the Palestinian state should be Jordan. They should just head off there as was the original plan. Not the worst idea in the world, nobody please record this. Donald Trump is popular and he moved the embassy to great fanfare back in the day. And Peter Dutton, right on, moment 24. And Peter Dutton as well has been absolutely sensational on Israel. He is at least level with the polls. So the question is it, as with so many of these other fringe causes, is this just being driven by a tiny minority of ratbags?
Oh, okay. I don't think it's a teeny tiny minority. I think the ill feeling is significant enough to be an issue, but it is certainly a minority. It's not a majority position, though. If you do look at some of the recent polling with the numbers who would like to see a ceasefire, that's worrying because that's actually sizable. That's not a minority, but I think a lot of that has to do with the media coverage of the conflict and how that's being presented. So if you took those people who say we want a ceasefire now and you took them through what that actually means, I would imagine many of them would change their position. But from what they know and what they've been exposed to, that's where they are right now.
So Caroline, I mean, you mentioned the media, and you're both obviously very much in the media. It's not that the media is. It's the first time we've seen the media being unfair to Israel. We're not talking about the ABC and the Guardian here anymore. I mean, watching Channel 9 is disgusting, disgustingly biased. The important exception I genuinely, sincerely mean is News Corp, which has been rock solid the whole way through. Caroline, why are journalists? Surely journalists can see at the very least there are nuances to this. At the very least there are complexities. Why aren't we seeing that in the bulletins on Nine and in the Age and so on?
Well, I think the Age is still quite a far left newspaper, and the left position and the far left position has always been against Israel. With Channel 9 and Fairfax papers, well, 9 was obviously overtaken by Fairfax, so it has been, save for, say, 2GB radio in Sydney and maybe the Melbourne equivalent, 3AW, it's been moving even more to the left. I think the Age has always been quite left, but the television elements have also been moving that way. So you have to see it in that context. But regardless, you have to understand that the people in the media, people who are reading the news bulletins, the 20-something, 30-something producers who are working on the desk, writing the lines, picking up the stories from wires or foreign press, they don't have the capacity to really...
The journalists.
Yes, that a lot of them are just newsreaders. Like, I was so frustrated watching a interview that Davina Smith, and I'm not sure if it was on the National Bulletin, but in Sydney, did. She's a Nine newsreader, and she did an interview with one of the leaders of the Palestinian movement here that organised the protests outside the Opera House. And there were no questions from her about, and this was before Israel had even retaliated. We should make that point, that horrific protest. There was not one single question about the F the Jews and the gas the Jews, which so many of us have heard despite the attempts to gaslight us over that. There wasn't a single question about that, and the flares and the terrible anti-Semitic chants that happened outside, and the assaults, which I'm sure Mark could speak more to, but it was just this softball interview, and I just thought, people like that and people who do not have an understanding of the region and the history and the nuances shouldn't be in positions to conduct interviews like that. But sadly it happens because I don't think there are enough people who do really understand the complexities of it, or they're so swept up in what their colleagues are going to think of them, and their colleagues who are ideologues, as many of them are, especially at the ABC, and what awards they might get. You're not going to win a journalism award for supporting Israel. You're just not. So that's what they care about sometimes, is more the peer acknowledgement.
Most of the ills in the world, in the West, are due to the media. This is not an isolated thing. Whether the topic is the excesses of the trans movement, whether it's race relations, whether it's global warming and energy policy, so much of the insanity you see has been led by the media. So to me, it's not a shock that the media coverage is what it is, because it is what it is just about every consequential issue. The media leans heavily left. It just does. Some professions lean conservative, some professions lean left. Media happens to be one that leans left, and that's just a shortcoming. I think these days, with other forms of information, everyone having a smartphone in their hand, having access to things that I know can sometimes be not always accurate, but then you could argue the mainstream media isn't always accurate either. But I think that actually is a positive thing. If you're talking about positives, is that there are other avenues you can go to, and you do wonder if Twitter, or X as it's called now, wasn't open, whether some of what we've seen in the last 6 months we would have seen, or whether that would have all been suppressed.
Yeah, Caroline, on that, I mean, I do hear from people, and it's a problem. If you go on X, there are some pretty funky people there who do say a lot of terrible things, and they do find a platform. But on the other side, would we have seen the atrocities of October the 7th without X? Would we see actually what's happening on the ground without Twitter or X? I mean, is it a force for good in the journalistic world, or are there problems with having the Lucas Gages of the world and all these really terrible characters come out of the woodwork?
I think as journalists we should support free speech,
Yeah.
but and X is better in one sense than places like Meta, which, even though it's run by a Jew, has allowed on Facebook and Instagram, through its algorithms, to this pro-Palestinian movement to take dominance. It's even worse on TikTok, which I'm not on, but you can imagine that's a Chinese corporation. They have an interest in sowing division and supporting Iran, I guess, and any anti-American ally.
I mean, TikTok has been described as digital fentanyl for the youth. I mean, that's clear. There are a very big school of thought that it's just one big psyop aimed at the West. But
I think the
TikTok is very different in China than it is in the West. And I think that tells you everything. They're not celebrating the sort of lunacy we see in TikTok in China.
I mean, I think the issue with social media, and Twitter especially, that sort of platform, is that it rewards extreme views on either side, because that's what's going to get engagement. That people who tend to be very hostile, people, I don't know how she's doing on Twitter these days, but like Clementine Ford, they're going to attract a big following.
Yeah.
I mean, you have reasonable people like Twitter, like RITA, who has a massive Twitter following. I don't even go on there. It's not a place that often you can have a reasonable debate, so it's just lost its appeal.
Yeah, correct. Look, but I mean, bringing it back to, as you said, media is a leading profession with some very notable and wonderful exceptions, of course. But at the end of the day,
exceptions being the term there, even at publications you consider to be conservative or centre-right, I won't. But even at those, if you walk through the editorial floor, I can guarantee you the majority would lean left. It is just what it is. It is.
Well, look, let's be fair. The left-right divide. I'm obviously of the political right, and somebody's been active in the freedom movement and so on. But really, what has gotten into Tucker Carlson's Wheaties lately?
The Christian video. I haven't seen that. I've heard about it. Okay. Did you see it?
So, for those of you that aren't aware, and lucky you, Tucker Carlson, somebody I very much admire. Going on his show was one of the highlights of that time of my life, and it really breaks my heart. But he had an interview with a Christian preacher or a minister from Bethlehem, the allegation being that Israel is just as terrible to the Palestinian Christians as it is to the Muslims. And, look, it's not... It was the accompaniment of he really wheeled out the same talking points you hear from, you know, a NASA, what's his name, or a Clementine Ford or something else. Like, it's I'd love to say it's just the left-wing sort of socialist rap bags.
There are people on the right like that. I don't know about that particular instance because I didn't see that. But Candace Owens, who was a very popular figure on the right,
Yeah.
She's had a huge falling out and has left the Daily Wire, which is Ben Shapiro's operation, because she's increasingly spouted anti-Semitic conspiracies. And I think maybe, this is a thought bubble, that there is also a movement on the right, and more the far right. Obviously, we know the far right have never been friends of the Jews, but just to take this more anti-establishment position. And we've seen Tucker cozy up to Putin, so it's only natural that he's...
I haven't seen this latest video, but with Tucker, I shouldn't really talk about it because I haven't seen it. I think that it's more of a isolationist position where they don't want America to be involved in global conflicts, whether it's the Ukraine, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's China, Taiwan. I think that is the sentiment from the right broadly.
Yeah, and I sympathise. I do get that part of the argument. I was, you know, misguided neocon in the 2000s as a high school student. I believed in going off and bombing the hell out of Iraq to, you know, just build democracy at gunpoint or whatever the point of that was. Lesson learned. It was a terrible time, so I can see that feeding into it. But at the same time, how can any thinking person look
I'll tell you
something
else, which is little talked about, and it is fairly controversial, but you know, we're going to go there. Some of the ill feeling from the right, and again, this is conjecture, I think could be because they see say in the US,
New York Democrats.
The New York Democrats, the bulk of the Jewish community they see as against their interests politically. It's not that they're Jewish, it's that they support policies that they don't like. And I think some of it could be as simple as that. And sometimes the explanation is a bit more simple than you think. And there is a bit of that, and I've had that discussion even locally with members of the Jewish community who feel like, you know, there's people within the own community who perhaps unwittingly are promoting people and policies and ideologies that are actually against their interests. That
like The Voice, for instance?
The Voice would be a very good example. Big Australia, big migration from places where assimilation is a problem and perhaps they don't share the sort of values that we want from new Australians. So all of those things, I think, are a factor. You can't discount any of it.
But look, I must say, Caroline, after October 7th, one people I have been feeling very sorry for are progressive Jews. And the reason I say that is these are people who fronted up with, you know, to support things that I wouldn't touch with a barge pole, like climate, like LGBT, whatever the hell, like Black Lives Matter, you name it, right? But out of good faith supported these social justice causes. All of a sudden they're waking up and finding out their social justice-minded comrades don't extend that same tolerance to Jews. What's the deal?
Well, I think there's been a fair bit of naivety in the progressive Jewish movement, and I've actually been warning about this for years. Clearly, if they hadn't been reading my columns or watching my commentary. But those movements have never been friends of the Jews. I mean, Black Lives Matter, it's in their constitution, I believe, that they're anti-Israel and basically anti-Jewish. They're quite clearly anti-Semitic. So I think there's a large part of it is naivety, and maybe it's like wanting the lion to eat you last, you know, because Jews have often been maligned, oppressed, and that we think maybe that some people think if they cozy up to those elements, they are going to offer their support in return, and it hasn't worked that way. We've seen at the Mardi Gras how there were calls to exclude Jews and Zionists from that, and cozy up to jihadis who would easily throw them off a building or stone them at the first opportunity. It's sad, but people are waking up to it, because if I hear one more person come up to me and go, I've never watched Sky News before,
Until now.
but it is the only channel we can watch now. Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate that. You a boost.
I mean, it's been talked about a lot, but this is what being naive, I just find that hard to swallow, because how naive do you have to be not to see the hostility towards Israel in particular, even if you didn't pick up that hostility extended to Jews, not just Israel. Because it's this mindset they have, this neo-Marxist oppressor, oppressed, and they see the world through that filter, they see every conflict through that filter, and in that filter, it doesn't matter if the Jews are the indigenous people of Israel, they are the successful oppressors, they're the ones with the power, and the Palestinians are the oppressed, so it doesn't matter how they behave, they're going to side with them. And BLM, I think a day or two after October 7, their Chicago chapter put out a tweet with a paraglider and saying they stand with Palestine. I mean, that's how just feral they are with hate for the Jewish state. So you've got to be awake to that. You've got to be awake to people and policies that are not in your interests. And there's a lot of Australians who are like that. You don't have to be a member of the Jewish community. There are a lot of Australians who promote a sort of self-loathing that is going to come back and bite them on the arse, but they're kind of blindly sleepwalking into it.
Well, as I say to people, a mob of people who goes around saying Australia is an illegitimate colonial, fiction. I mean, gee, what those people say about the Balfour Declaration and so on. But anyway...
Well, this is why if you actually go to any of these Palestinian rallies, you will see a lot of crossover with the Indigenous cause. The speakers will mention it. There's similar themes about stolen land, colonisation, illegitimate nations. It is the themes they've connected are very strong. So that's why I see these Indigenous flags at these Palestinian or anti-Israeli rallies.
And the common thread, really, to me, it's anti-West, it's anti-civilisation and so on, but it's also, I mean, this is really getting very philosophical here, but it's also deeply nihilistic. To me, it talks to a society that, as you said, is self-loathing. How have we gotten to the point where we're so unhappy that we're literally pulling down statues of our founding, but literally trying to dissolve our own country like it's like it's an AGM and we're winding up a corporation or something? I mean, how did we fall into this funk as a society?
Yeah, I mean, we say this term a lot, but it is the march, the Marxist cultural march through the institutions that's happening. I do think there's a bit of a reckoning as well, and the majority's waking up. Obviously, it's a small vocal minority that are still marching on the streets. So every week it happens in Sydney and here in Melbourne as well. And vandalising statues. Don't forget, the overwhelming majority of Australians either don't care that deeply about the Middle East issue and don't think about issues like antisemitism, which they should. And I'm deeply appreciative to people like Mark who stand up and say, we're not going to let it happen on our watch, because Jews are a tiny minority. But it is the small minority, and it's university students that think that...
University students think these days.
Yeah, well, or not think, because it seems to be the problem, but they think that they're correcting these problematic figures of the past, and that...
It is a worry though, because just like all those other issues we've talked about, it might start off with a fringe element in universities, but it expands into society very quickly, and we've seen that with that sort of Marxist mindset increasingly taking over corporations. We were talking before about ESG policies and DEI and CRT, all these philosophies that are not, or they should be strongly challenged, have taken over. They start off in the universities and they infect like a cancer, and you've got to take a stand. You've got to get apathetic people who aren't particularly politically active to understand. Just because you don't care about the culture wars doesn't mean the culture wars don't care about you. They do, and they will impact your life. Soon you'll have to have, all sorts of extra responsibilities at work, whether it's the SG stuff, whether it's, putting your pronouns on your business cards or, whatever it is. If you don't take a stand, it will keep getting a little bit worse. Yeah,
and look, you're right about the universities. I was on campus in sort of the mid-2000s, right? Long before anybody had heard of a pan-gender bathroom or anything like that. But it was a thing at Melbourne Uni, and I was like, what the hell has this been, a pan-gender bath? Well, I didn't appreciate it. What, my Ryman buddies at campus didn't appreciate was that every other student was taking this stuff at face value, and then they went off and got a job, in corporate affairs at some company or something, and started spreading it. And CEOs of these companies, with these woke graduates coming, they're a bit like, a dad with like hippie children or something, and like they want to have crazy ideas. Oh, well, I don't understand it, but the kids like it. See, why are CEOs going along with this kind of stuff? Why are boards going along with it?
Because
where are the grown-ups?
There's so much pressure from activists and lobby groups that they cave very quickly, and they think if they don't do that, if they don't buckle to some Twitter boycott campaign, that they're going to fall out of favour with their customers. But that's entirely wrong. They have to. They cannot kowtow to these people. And we've seen the problems. We've seen. I think you were going to talk about this a bit later. But I'll just bring up the examples of where, go woke, go broke is such an overused expression for a reason, like Bud Light. These companies think that they're building good social capital by, acquiescing to these lunatic activists and having some transgender person performing a pantomime of a woman to sell beer. And then when all their customers go, F this, we do not want to drink this beer. Like, we're about sport and watching footy, and you're just pushing this stuff onto us. Yeah. It doesn't work. Well, and they're learning that now.
And I don't mean to pick on transgender people or anything like that, but when I'm sitting down with a beer, I don't want to think about that kind of stuff either. Even course I agree with. But this is the problem. The personal has not become political. We have done away with religion and with common ground and common cultural icons. We can't even agree on whether we should have Australia Day on the right day, for God's sake. So we're replacing it with the tribalism inherent in politics. How do you unscramble that egg?
Yeah, this is the difficulty. Cara mentioned the march through the institutions, and it is evident everywhere. I've got a piece in tomorrow's Herald Sun about this research that was released this week. The Australian Population Research Institute, and they do this annual survey, and this year they measured sense of belonging, so how closely you feel connected to Australia. And the data, it's not a huge shock, but it's still disturbing. So older Australians, say 60s and above, overwhelming majority, around 80%, feel a very deep connection to the country. When you're looking at under 30s, and we're talking about voters here, so 18 to 29, it's less than 1 in 3 feel that deep connection. So if you don't feel that deep connection to your country, if you're ashamed of your country, if you have no sense of pride in your country, then something fills that void. Yeah. And for so many of these people, it has become this politics, which is really quite toxic. It's incoherent. 1 minute they're siding, with people who have absolutely no tolerance for their lifestyle, and the next minute, the positions are completely incoherent, but they make sense if you look at it through that neo-Marxist framework of oppressed and oppressor. And
they make sense because it's actually very seductive. Because look, we're all unhappy. Inflation's high. It's difficult for people in my generation to know all about the housing issues and so on. When you're being told, well, it's not your fault, it's structural racism. Oh, it's just capitalism in the system, man. Oh no, it's it's a very seductive. So what's to be done?
I'm an atheist, but I really do think atheism doesn't work for society. I think it works for me, but I think secularism is actually quite dangerous because in the absence of religion, something darker can take hold, and I think we're seeing that with our society. I think we're in to get very deep, a civilizational decline. I think we are seeing an ideological war, and in America you can see it very clearly, and I think people there are a lot more awake to what's happening. You've got the red states, the blue states, you've got two different philosophies at work. Here we seem to be sort of blind to a lot of it, and we really don't have that deep level of debate about, what we want to be as a country, and, are we happy with this road we're going down?
Well, I always say, and I've been saying this since October 7th, the problem isn't just that the Western world, including Australia, hasn't abandoned the Jews. The problem is also that the West has abandoned Christianity. Now, obviously, I'm a non-Christian, most people in this room are non-Christians, but as you said, there was utility once upon a time in having a society that had as its bedrock the Ten Commandments: love thy neighbour, turn the other cheek, do unto others.
These are all Judeo-Christian ideals, so it's
that's true.
And I think you can still hold those ideals very closely, even if you're not religious or if you're an atheist. But it's people who have abandoned that, and I don't know what the answer is. I'd probably be a very powerful, rich person if I knew the answer, but there has to be some kind of correction happening in society, because it is unfortunate, but I think young people especially, obviously there's a cost of living crisis, they can't afford their own homes. Maybe it is just, it's just a fact of life that when you're young, you tend to be attracted to more radical, more extreme ideas.
Never happened to me.
Never. But also look at what we're facing on the other side. I mean, in the Middle East, it's a fundamentalist Islamic ideology that has no doubt, self-doubt about what it is. It is happy for its people to die in its name. Yeah. And we spend years quibbling over whether we should have Australia Day on a certain day, and they have no doubt about who they are and what they believe, and it's very difficult if you're a divided society to fight against that.
That's absolutely correct. Look, I think Rabbi, we're almost due for some questions from the floor. So do we have a roving mic wandering around? Oh,
yours.
I hereby yield the microphone. There we go.
Well, you could, yeah.
Oh, Mr. Ridings. Oh, good. Excellent.
Question from the back here?
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you for tonight, and thank you to Caroline and Rita for turning up, and thank you to News Corp as practically the only media organisation that makes any common sense whatsoever. So you've been very good at articulating the various elements of the problems that we all face. And I was wondering, for each of the three of you, that if you had the levers of power at your fingertips, what hard and or soft actions would you take, and short and long-term actions would you take if you had the capacity to snap your fingers and change things? What would you actually do?
3 things. God. Just off the top of my head, curriculum would be number one, from prep through university. I used to think, people could withstand that. You'd go through that, and then you'd go to the real world, and you'd realise the nonsense you were indoctrinated in. I don't think that anymore. I think if you fed a diet of leftist indoctrination for over a decade, and then you enter the workplace and you've got HR departments reaffirming this craziness, it's very hard to break away from it. So that would be, the left was smart. They started their march through the institutions in academia, and I think that's where you've got to start remedying it. And I don't know, I would pray as an atheist for a leader with backbone. It makes all the difference. If you've got a leader who is willing to fight, and this is the problem with conservatives in general, particularly in this country, they are cowards, they don't want to fight. The most they want to do is occasionally say no. So they continuously play their ideological opponents by their rules. And they don't advance their values. You look at the appointments Labor make when they're in power, whether it's state or federal, the new Governor-General, an absolute ideologue on every cause. And then you compare that to the coalition. You know, they put Ita Buttrose to head the ABC. They put Julie Inman Grant to be the E-Safety Commissioner. They just waste power. So that's what I would pray for leaders who've got vision and who've got backbone. And thirdly, what else do we want? You want better news media, but you know that's again wishful thinking.
Get rid of the ABC.
Well, it's very hard to justify why you would have the ABC and the SBS. SBS flies under the radar because so much of the focus is on the bigger ABC, but SBS is the recipient of hundreds of millions of dollars annually, and they just don't have any purpose in the new media age where you can get foreign language content anywhere easily. So why do we have an SBS? Just imagine, you know...
like the soccer, I'm sure.
You can get soccer anywhere, including Fox Sports, I should say.
Caroline.
Well, just to Rita's, lower taxes, but no, I think if just focusing on the Israel question, pretty much the opposite of everything that Labor's done recently, I would not equivocate on that issue. I would stand strongly with our top ally in the Middle East, and I would have, if I was the Prime Minister or Foreign Minister, have got on the phone to Netanyahu almost immediately after October 7, which didn't happen. I would have gone over there, which Albanese hasn't done. If I was Penny Wong, I would have visited the sites of the massacre, which she didn't do. And I wouldn't be equivocating in a way that is never going to appease the pro-Palestinian and Muslim voters, because even they have said that Penny Wong's comments this week don't go far enough in that they're shifting to recognise a Palestinian state. So I wouldn't worry about appeasing a group just for political reasons, and I would stand firm in my support of an ally and with the Jewish people after the worst attack since the Holocaust.
Well, the Prime Minister can't even be bothered going to the biggest synagogue in the country. He's been invited more than once, from what I understand, to go to Bondi's synagogue.
Central.
Yeah, and it's, you know, not far from where he lives in Kirribilli. And he's declined the invitation. Peter Dutton's going to be there, but that, I think, speaks volumes for someone who is so conscious of his image and being present in these. So yeah, there's certainly a problem. They're terrified of losing some of those crucial Western Sydney seats with large Muslim populations.
And the inner city seats to the Teals and the Greens. That's what they can. And there isn't probably that many votes in it. Again, the Jewish population, very small, considerably, but it is a moral point. There's such a lack of moral backbone.
To fix Labor care about.
I know, but that's what I would do.
Peter Dutton does.
Well, Labor are looking at the raw numbers. They're looking at the Muslim population being 8 times that of the Jewish population in this country. They're looking at those crucial Sydney seats. I think they're jumping at shadows, really, because the coalition is strongly pro-Israel, so those voters aren't going to go and vote for the coalition. We've got compulsory voting, so they need to show up. It's not like the Democrats' problem where they don't think they're going to lose voters to Trump, but they think these voters just aren't going to show up because they're upset with them. So Labor doesn't have that issue here. And though, yes, they've got the option of the Greens, who are virulently anti-Israel, the Greens' other social policies are abhorrent to many in the Muslim population. So are they going to switch their vote and turn a Labor seat green? I doubt that very much. So I think
there
Labor
are
are
some Muslim
jumping
candidates, especially in Western Sydney, who are now, well, not candidates, but people who are talking about running for candidacy, and that could be a real problem for them as well. But
it made question time very entertaining, though, I must say. So we'll see. Look, and the question asked all three. So for what it's worth, my response would be: look, again, I stand by my comments made earlier. With anti-Semitism, it tends to happen when times are bad economically, when people are unhappy, when people don't have jobs, whether it's famine in ancient Egypt, whether it's the decline of Rome, whether it's Weimar Germany and hyperinflation. So the best way to address all these things, people are reaching for this crap because they are unhappy and they need something in their lives. Cut taxes, cut regulation, get people back to work. Stop charging us so much for a pint of beer, for God's sake. Leave us alone, and for God's sake, above all, never, ever, ever, ever put us under house arrest for a case of the sniffles, ever, ever again. All right, next question.
Good. Thank you to all of you. I want to just come back to the media for a moment, because I remember the times when politicians would go on TV and actually be challenged by the interviewer, and we don't see that anymore, obviously, because those on the left go to the ABC, those on the right go to Sky, and I think that the electorate is poorer because of that, because that would help us make up our mind on any issue. So I'm just wondering if you think we can ever get back to that point where the politicians will really stand up and be scrutinised basically by the public.
well, I do think it still does happen on Sky. During the day, before dark Sky, we have very, I would say, straight journalists, and certainly not journalists of the right. I don't think they can be described that way. And they have politicians of both stripes. And I do think we have some good anchors and hosts that interrogate them. And on the ABC, you do sometimes see a Liberal or coalition politician go on there. I'm trying to think of the recent example with Sarah Ferguson. She wouldn't let him have a word in. It was about nuclear energy, and she just kept interrupting. So I guess that's why people do tend to speak to their own echo chambers. It would be great to see some more town hall type situations with politicians where people could ask them questions, but those forums like Q&A have just become just really stacked, left. The audience are often just this, you just know what kind of questions they're going to ask, so it doesn't seem like a very fair place for anyone who's centre-right.
Well, I have no idea what somebody's going to ask next, so next question. Front row again. Andy? Thanks,
First of all, thank you so much for all the talk. I've learned so much already. I was going to actually refer to the point with this isolationist kind of movement led by Candace and Tucker. I don't know if you have an answer to that, but do you know how popular it's getting? Just because I do feel like there is quite a lot of censorship towards the Jewish voice, or the more traditional conservative view, which is basically, let's maintain, the pro-establishment voice. I can definitely see it, just looking at comments and stuff. It's a lot of censorship of the Jews and, people who are pro-establishment. Do you see that movement kind of rising? Because I do definitely see it rising in numbers in terms of views, and Candace being more popular than Ben, Daily Wire, and I'm just wondering what your view is.
Yeah, there's definitely an audience for it. But again, those people aren't single topic commentators. So you could look at their numbers and their popularity and say, well, that's for a variety of reasons. It's not their attitude to the Middle East or their isolationist attitude, but certainly it's not a teeny tiny minority. And what you said before about harsh economic times, I think that plays into it. So I've been to America, 4 times in the last 3 years, and the inflation there is astonishing. I do not believe the official figures. I mean, when you look at things that everybody uses, food, gas, that it has just gone up so much. And people are doing it hard. And I think in that environment, when they're seeing billions, trillions spent overseas, there is this ill feeling towards that. So I think that's where that comes from. And yeah, if you have more prosperity, if you lower taxes, have less regulation, you probably remedy a lot of that. I think it has a lot to do with it.
And there's obviously still quite an anti-Semitic element in the far right. And they know that if they can capture that audience as well, I do believe that anti-Semitism underpins a lot of it too. I mean, Candace Owens was out there supporting Kanye West after his comments. She knows that he still has a big audience. He still has a big base that support him for those comments, and she can capture that as well. So I don't think we should underestimate how big the just kind of far-right neo-Nazi element of it too. We do need to worry, I think, more about what's happening on the left, because what's on the right has been so brazen. I think people have ignored what has been happening on the left.
And the left are in
as
power
disturbing.
too.
And they're in
The
power.
left control not only the leaders of government and so on, they control the universities, as you said, in the media.
And the bureaucracy.
Nobody cares about a few, idiots marching in black balaclavas in Ballarat like the actual neo-Nazis do. But yeah, anyway, we have one more.
Rita wanted
Well, if you look at the Democrats, you've got not only the squad who have got disproportionate influence and power, but you've got, Elizabeth Warren came out this week and said Israel's committing genocide. It is, that sort of attitude has been completely normalised in the Democrats, and people sort of obsess about, I can't even know who they are because I don't see much of them. Is it Nick Fuentes or something? Yeah. So these sort of neo-Nazis or far-right streamers on the right. Yeah. And then you're like, fine, call them out, but you've got people in real positions of power on the left and you're ignoring that to obsess about this. I think it's just counterproductive.
Thank you very much. Society in general has been moving gradually, inexorably to the left. This is happening worldwide, and there are many, many reasons why that is happening. So, what's happening is that people are focusing too much on the plight of the bottom tail in the bell curve, and they're ignoring the contribution made by people at the top tail. I'm not Jewish. I was born a Hindu, but I'm now atheist. But I love Jewish people because of their conscientiousness and the disproportionate contribution they make to the world, not just one country. And therefore, unless we make people realize the benefits of the top tail they make to the economy, which happens to be disproportionately contribution made by Jewish people, unless we make that contribution made by the top tail known to the people in economy, economics, and everything. Unless that happens, I think the plight of Jewish people or any people who are the top tail will continue. That's my comment. Would you like to comment on that, please? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
I agree in this country you can make the argument that we are sort of going left when you look at the younger population and where their politics lie, and they're strongly opting for the Greens, even above Labor, which is a massive worry when you look at the Greens. But I'm not sure that's a worldwide thing. You mentioned a bunch of leaders at the start of the chat, and you look at Europe, where there's a wave of centre-right parties taking over from Italy to Sweden to Hungary, I think there is this swing back. You look at somewhere like Argentina, which had just decades of socialist craziness went from being, relatively wealthy, sitting on massive amounts of oil, and now they've gone bang the other way, and he's had an immediate impact, Millet. It's quite astonishing. He halved their monthly inflation rate recently, recorded the first monthly budget surplus in a decade, like things that you would think would take some time. So it's early days, let's not get ahead of ourselves, but that's pretty promising.
But this goes way off topic with Israel and everything else, but the point has to be made. They went through 100 years of disastrous, centralised economic policy, socialism, handouts, you name it. Now that they've gotten over it and they're, swinging back, but we read today Albanese is, on about industry assistance and subsidies and all this other stuff. Anyway, we don't have time to litigate economic and trade and industry policy. One more.
And I still think most Australians are pretty sensible and sane, despite what's presented in the media. And I think The Voice showed that. I mean, The Voice was astonishing when you look at the powers that were promoting it. Every big corporation, celebrities, obviously the government, just the pressure was overwhelming, and Australians said, "No, screw you, we're not doing it." And this is despite the yes side outspending the no side remarkably. I remember speaking to the no side, and they just did not have the money to do TV ads properly in Melbourne and Sydney, so they focused on Adelaide, where it's much cheaper to buy ads. And you look at Adelaide, and they had 2 in 3 vote no. And I wonder if they had the equal resources the yes side has, if they could have spent the money the yes side has, whether we would have got exactly the same results in Victoria and New South Wales as well. But they had a fraction of the yes side's money.
Thank you to both of you and Rita, Caroline, because we're living in a state of confusion where the world is so confused, so much disinformation, and we know that from history that wars that start with the Jews never end with the Jews, and we also know that without Joseph Goebbels during World War II, Hitler and his propaganda machine would not have been able to culminate in the Holocaust. And so many agendas being hijacked. I mean, Sir William Cooper, if only people knew that 1939 Kristallnacht, it was the minority of Aborigines, a small little historical fact, that the only minority in the world that went to the consulate here in the German embassy and protested for the Jewish people that were being persecuted because they truly understand persecution. And yet we see so many useful idiots in the city that pretend to be for the indigenous where they've got no idea really in terms of the reality. My question is, because it's almost come to the state, or it is at the state, where obviously Israel is faced with this existential threat, but more globally, Jewish people are faced with real questions, not only about their identity as Jews, but also in terms of living in the diaspora. So many people say, is it safe anymore? Do we need to return to our homeland? Are we going to be, discriminated against to the extent that we can't practice our freedoms of religion the way, we should be able to, even though it's only 70 years or, 75 years since the Holocaust. So, my question is, the media have such a strong influence. We know that, the media has the power to trial by media to make somebody innocent guilty and somebody guilty innocent, quite literally. We've seen that so many times, especially today's cancel culture. My question is, and I'm getting to, I don't mean to digress or go on, but because the media, and you have so many journalists which will unashamedly, like you said, will call out Israel committing genocide when it's anything but that. It's a just cause. We need Israel's just at the front line, as it's just happening again and again throughout our history. But here we are. So thank you. But I'm just my question is, what can be done about people in these positions of power and in the media that are incitement. It's an incitement to hatred. It's not just enough to say we call them out. Why isn't there stronger? I don't know, not laws, but why isn't it illegal? What can be done to actually make it stop? Because it's not just an existential threat in Israel, but it's not safe anymore for us as Jews.
It's really hard because when you have hate preachers in mosques calling for death to Jews and the police does nothing, and it's up to members of the Jewish community to take a case to the Human Rights Commission, which is what's happening at the moment, it's going to be nigh impossible to stop commentary that is, critical of Israel to a point that it's obvious that, it's completely biased or it's driven by something more than just fair criticism. It's like a complete double standard. There are guidelines, there are codes, broadcasting code. You can make complaints, especially when it comes to the ABC, which has a charter, to be fair, and they do get a lot of complaints, but they also have a very strong activist element, which we've seen with the Antoinette Lattouf case, which will come out and will say that the ABC is just following, answering to the Israel lobby or whatever other accusations, but it still has to investigate those complaints. But it's pretty much a toothless tiger. So, people do need to use their voices, write letters, but at the same token, I don't believe in cancel culture. I don't think people should lose their jobs on either side because of it. I don't think Antoinette Lattouf should have been put in that position in the first place. That was just pure stupidity. But, it's tough because if we can't do much about hate preachers, I don't know what you do about a biased media.
And with the media, it's always not just how they report something, but what they choose to report and what they choose not to report. So that's a very powerful tool as well. So you can ignore something that's really significant and have an impact that way.
You can also, I think the most powerful thing you do won't affect the ABC because they're not driven by ratings, but when it comes to commercial media, cancel subscriptions of newspapers you don't agree with. Don't watch the television stations that you think are unfair, and don't give them those ratings, although it works on a subscription box basis, so it's not always going to pan out. Don't click, though they're driven, the commercial media, by ratings and views, so if you vote with your feet and your remotes, it may have an impact, but it's going to be small, obviously.
Unfortunately, none of us can not pay for the ABC because that's done by Fox.
No, they don't
You can watch Sky, so
yes, buy a Foxtel subscription.
Could we?
Is your construction to play us off? Or?
No, we've got 7. I'm wondering if you could maybe help people, give them some language to answer some of the main questions people are being challenged. The number, the ceasefire, just like quick answers that people could share with other people. Specifically around Israel, for both of you.
Okay, so do you mean things like when people bring up issues like the number of casualties?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, one thing that I always see, for example, I did an article this week for our website about Clementine Ford, and her response to me was, Israel has indiscriminately murdered more than 35,000 Palestinians, and it's genocide, blah, blah, blah. First of all, her figure was inflated even above the Hamas figure. She's killed an extra 2,000 people. The Ministry of Health... Well, exactly. Not even Hamas is claiming. Their latest that I read was, I think, 33,000. Obviously, those figures are disputed. They haven't been independently verified. I think that's a really important point to make. But regardless of the overall figure, they don't tell you how many are civilians and how many are terrorists. And Israel have said that 13,000 terrorists have been killed. So even if you accept the Hamas numbers, the actual ratio is far, and it's horrible to have any civilian death. It is an absolute tragedy. I can't stand seeing those pictures of children and babies injured or crying either. It is horrendous. But when you look at the history of any urban warfare, and in a situation where Hamas is using its people as human shields and its children as human shields, it's actually a very I don't want to use the word good ratio, but it's actually a very low ratio of civilian deaths. So I think that's an important point to make. And Israel could have flattened Gaza in a day if it wanted to. So any accusations of genocide and wanting to wipe out the Palestinian population is just absurd.
And the same with the Palestinian state. Well,
The apartheid thing.
the apartheid thing, you all know, you've all been to Israel, I presume, and you know, was it 1 in 5? What's the ratio of Arab Jews in Israel?
It's 20%.
True.
Yeah. So, and you know, they serve in the parliament, they serve in the courts, they have rights, full rights. So that this notion of apartheid is obviously absurd. I think that the discussion that's going to come up now, particularly with the position the Australian government has taken, is the Palestinian state and two-state solution. I mean, again, that on its face is absurd, because you just ask the question, who will run the Palestinian state? Is it Hamas? Because if there were elections, Hamas would win. There's 19 years in, because Hamas would win there as well, and there'd be another Gaza. So I think, yeah, there's often, some of the most pro-Palestinian advocates can fall over after just one or two very simple questions, because they're very difficult to answer. But then there's people who just, you're not going to convince, whatever the issue is. They have an ideological position, and logic, facts, figures, nothing's going to move them from that position. Pick your battles.
We'll do the last question. Last one.
It's often said that Australia is 1 or 2 years behind the world, and in terms of political and cultural changes and developments. Yet our political leadership seems to ignore the failure of woke ideology based policies overseas, and continue on a particular path that has been proven to be failing overseas. For example, some climate change policies have totally failed overseas. Energy security has been affected in Europe, for example. Immigration problems and issues, cultural problems in Europe, in particular in the UK, with a certain sector of immigration policy. So why doesn't Australia use that delay, that period, that we can see what's happening in the rest of the world? Why don't we avoid these problems? Why doesn't our political leadership take advantage of that delay that we probably should consider an advantage?
I think part of the problem is the lack of courage of our politicians. I mean, Scott Morrison said there are no jobs in the culture wars. That's a defeatist, cowardly position. The culture wars matter. You're talking about values, you're talking about the sort of society you're building. They're consequential issues. It's not some trivial plaything that you leave for social media. So you need politicians of conviction and courage who can prosecute an argument. And then I think Australians overwhelmingly are sensible when they have those two clear choices. But if you don't give them a choice, if you are Victoria, for example, where you've got Labor and then you've got the Quislings and the Liberal Party, well, if you don't have a choice, you don't have a choice. What are you voting for? At the last state election, what were the options? Australia, that's why a lot of times when Australians say America's so terrible, they're so polarised, they've got it so bad. I disagree entirely. Americans, at least, a great many of them, are awake to what's happening. They understand there's an ideological fight, whatever side they're on, and they're engaged. Here, we've got this uniparty sort of mentality, and hopefully, Dutton will be better. He certainly was when he came to The Voice, and he has been strong with Israel. So
yeah, there hasn't been enough difference between the parties, not just on the state level, but on a federal level. But it could change with the opposition. Also, we've signed ourselves up, when it comes to energy policy, we've signed ourselves up to all these global targets, it's very difficult. When the worst polluters in the world are not beholden to them, like China, you know, but that's what our politicians have done.
Well, look, I wish we had time to sit here all night. This is notwithstanding I wish it was better subject matter, but it's been so much fun to sit down with both of you. Everybody, please join me in thanking Rita, PANAHI, and Caroline. And thank you again to Rabbi Cohen.
Thank you, so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. I just want to say tonight, maybe was a drop, like people, somehow maybe feel a drop defeatist. I just want to tell you something. Our future has never been brighter. Believe it with all your heart, with all your soul, because you guys are in this room, you guys are here. I'm telling you, I work with young people. We are strong. I'm Israel Chai. I would not worry. I would not worry. We are worried, and because we're worried, we know what we need to do. We are strong, we'll keep persevering, and let's not allow ourselves to have this defeatist attitude, because I promise you one thing with certainty. We're going to be here forever. We're all in it together. We are one big, beautiful family, and we've got friends all around, and together we're going to grow and keep evolving. So thank you. Let's be positive. Let's be strong. And I want to once again thank you both. Really, I'm not a big, just from a lack of time, I'm not a big watcher of news. I don't have a TV at home, believe it or not, right? But I do watch on my phone, and you guys are on it, okay? And I just want to tell you something that I'm fortunate. I don't get to listen to I don't get to listen to Channel 9 and all those other people. They don't come on my feed anymore, so that's fantastic, okay? But I listen to you guys, and it's just so reassuring, okay? So thank you to both of you. We've got something ever so small. It's really tiny. Rita, this is a new book, okay, Caroline?
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Here's a book for you. Don't judge your cover, don't worry. And Mark, I want you to come up. I also got you a book because I just appreciate what you're doing, and thank you so much. And thank you all so much for coming out. I want to thank my partner in crime right over here, Brian Berger in the front row, who does such incredible work. And thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you once again to our great panelists. You guys did an incredible job, so informative. I learned so much tonight. And let's spread the message of love, of hope, of positivity. Come on the 19th of May. There's events all the time, and we've got this, guys. Don't worry. Okay? Believe it. Believe it. Let's hear it. Come on. Let's go. There you go.
We survived thousands of years. I think we've got this.